Hello, and welcome to the Advancing Pilot Podcast, the show for the aspiring commercial pilot or anyone interested in learning more, increasing your skills, and flying more safely. Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of the show. If this is your first time listening, then welcome, and if it's not, welcome back. Last week, we talked about 5 unexpected ways to improve your flying skills, so be sure to tune into episode 1 if that's something that you're interested in hearing about. This episode is all about night flying. I'll talk a little about how the FAA defines the term night, some general tips for flying at night, and we'll dive a bit into the night cross-country requirement for the commercial, which was the topic of a recent newsletter of mine. But we're going to take the discussion in a few different directions today, so keep on listening, even if you've already read the related newsletter email or the article on the website about night cross-country flying. This podcast is here to fill in some of the many knowledge gaps that exist between the mandatory required training to earn pilot certificates and the ability to fly competently and confidently. We'll discuss items like how to make your night flights or long cross-country safer and more comfortable, make your flight training more efficient, keep your passengers more comfortable, and improve your proficiency across the broad variety of skills that are necessary for being a safe and capable pilot. My name is Jeff. I'm an instrument-rated commercial pilot, advanced ground instructor, and instrument ground instructor, also in the home stretch of finishing up my CFI certificate as I record this in early 2026. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I also hope that you will sign up for my free email newsletter at advancingpilot.com, and you may also want to check out my Instagram, where I am Advancing Pilot. Before we jump in, I just want to remind you that these ideas are not a substitute for training with your CFI, so use them as a starting point for discussion with your instructor before attempting anything discussed here. Before we talk about flying at night, let's look at the 3 different ways that the FAA defines night. Now, I need to warn you that the next 90 seconds or so get a little bit dry. Don't worry if you don't catch all the details here. I mostly want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that the FAA does consider your night flying in 3 different ways, so be sure to dig into those regulations regarding the usage of lights, carrying passengers at night, and logging your night flight time. This podcast episode gets more interesting in about 2 minutes, I swear, once we get through these regulations. So 14 CFR 91.209 reminds us that we need to use our position lights from sunset to sunrise. And you may also need your anti-collision lights on during this time, but the PIC has more discretion regarding the use of anti-collision lights. I'm paraphrasing a bit here, so be sure to check out the regs for the complete story. I also left out the variation of this rule specific to Alaska, so be sure to check the regs again if that's where you're operating. So we know that we need to check the sunset and sunrise times, but how do we do that? Personally, I just check ForeFlight, but many other websites and EFB apps will have that information for you as well. If your concern is with logging nighttime, then 14 CFR 1.1 tells us that night is defined as the time between the end of evening civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight as published in the Air Almanac, converted to local time. While this sounds ridiculously complicated, don't worry. If you don't have a copy of the Air Almanac with you, ForeFlight and other EFBs and websites will give you this information as well. Finally, if your concern is staying legal for carrying passengers at night, then refer to 14 CFR 61.57b, which tells us in part that no person may act as pilot in command of an aircraft carrying persons during the period beginning 1 hour after sunset and ending 1 hour before sunrise, unless within the preceding 90 days that person has made at least 3 takeoffs and 3 landings to a full stop during the period beginning 1 hour after sunset and ending 1 hour before sunrise. So again, we can refer to the sunset time that we retrieved from our EFB or other source earlier when talking about when we need to use our position lights, but now we need to add an hour to know which period is being referred to in 61.57b. Now that we know what the term night refers to, let's talk about some of the night training requirements. There are some key differences between the night cross-country requirements for private versus commercial certificates, and I propose that nearly all pilots might want to grab an instructor and replicate the commercial version, even if you already have your commercial certificate or if you never plan on getting one. For those of you actively pursuing your commercial certificate, this will shed some light on what to expect from your night cross-country. Let's start with the regs for the night commercial cross-country requirement. So 14 CFR 61.129A tells us that for a commercial certificate, we must perform 1 2-hour cross-country flight in a single-engine airplane in nighttime conditions that consist of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles from the original point of departure. Now, since this falls under the 20 hours of training subpart, it is performed with an instructor. This flight, along with the 5 hours of solo night VFR required for the commercial certificate under 14 CFR 61.129A, was some of the most rewarding facets of my commercial pilot training, and it really transformed my confidence and ability and enjoyment of night flying. So let's back up a bit and talk about the night flying requirements to get a private certificate. All private pilot applicants are required to perform a night flight with their instructor to an airport greater than 50 nautical miles from their home airport. For several reasons, this flight is often conducted as kind of a nighttime repeat of one of the student pilot's daytime cross-country flights. Much of the geography, airspace, airports, frequencies, obstacles, potential emergency landing spots, and other gotchas that can pop up on a flight are kind of a known quantity. The flight time is short enough that it will typically be done without needing to accomplish ground operations at an unfamiliar airport in the dark. Even with these easy mode options in place, this can still be a challenging and often intimidating flight for student pilots. That cross country, along with the other fairly meager night requirements listed in 14 CFR 61.109A of 10 takeoffs and landings and 3 hours of total night flying time, gives the freshly minted private pilot a fighting chance, but it still isn't really representative of the full gamut of challenges that come with safely operating an aircraft at night. The commercial requirement essentially doubles this distance while still keeping the instructor along. Why is this valuable? First, doubling the required distance to 100 nautical miles introduces several dimensions of pre-flight planning that may have been less critical for the shorter night flight. First is the weather. When was the last time you considered your personal minimums for a night flight? You may feel safe landing in a 15-knot crosswind during the day, but diminished ability to judge distances at night might make you rethink that number in the dark if you haven't practiced it recently. What about minimum cloud ceilings? Marginal VFR conditions that are already hazardous during the day can become significantly more dangerous at night. Conditions can change vastly over a 100 nautical mile distance, and the ability to judge cloud clearance is often almost non-existent until you've actually entered the cloud. An aircraft squawk or deferred maintenance item that was judged as an acceptable risk for your typical daytime flights may feel less acceptable when considering possibly some desolate areas that you might be flying over at night. There is no set of one-size-fits-all answers that applies to all pilots, aircraft, and environments, but a pre-flight discussion on these topics and more with a good CFI before your night cross-country can be very eye-opening. A night flight of any significant distance raises many questions about route and altitude planning to best maximize feasible landing options in an emergency, maintaining safe clearance from clouds and obstacles, fuel planning, and taking physiological issues and needs into account. Now, don't get me wrong, night flights can provide some of the most rewarding time that you'll ever spend in an aircraft. There's often calmer air, less traffic, and some really amazing views at night. Being able to safely and confidently operate an aircraft throughout all phases of a night flight is also a huge boost to your overall confidence and capability as a pilot. Personally, I treat almost all night flying as instrument flying whenever possible, especially when the plan is to cover any kind of significant distance. But this isn't always possible, and sometimes a decision must be made whether it's safe to continue VFR, and this is another great aspect to discuss with your instructor. Now, night flying isn't intrinsically hard, but it does create a higher probability of needing a plan B while simultaneously making it more difficult to actually create that plan on the fly. For example, increased difficulty judging weather at night raises the odds of needing to divert to an alternate airport, while the dark cockpit can make it more difficult to locate information about that airport, including any obstacles that may be invisible in the dark, instructions for turning on pilot-controlled lighting, and any NOTAMs that may become more critical without full visual acuity that you're accustomed to during the day. Fatigue from simply being awake later at night can be compounded by the increased impact of reduced oxygen on our vision at night, as well as by other common visual illusions, such as autokinesis, in which fixating on a light source causes apparent motion of that light, false horizons, often created by clouds or rows of ground lighting at night, or simply annoying and disorienting flashing in the airport environment caused by other aircraft with their strobes on, or runway and identifier lights that are turned up too high, or other potential factors that can come into play. So here are a few ideas for getting the most out of your long night training flight. Number one, choose your instructor wisely. You want someone who will help you stay safe if anything goes wrong while also maximizing the learning potential of the experience. Number 2, emphasize the pre-flight brief. As discussed above, the details of this will vary depending on your experience, aircraft, flight environment, and other factors. Number 3, set the expectation that your instructor shouldn't make things unrealistically easy for you by planning your route, handling all the radio calls, or otherwise reducing your workload too much, unless, of course, this becomes a safety issue. This flight should be a building block toward boosting your confidence and competence in completing similar flights on your own or with passengers when you're ready. Number 4, don't skip the post-flight brief. You may be really tired by the time you get home and put the plane to bed, but make sure that you and your instructor at least take a few minutes to record notes so you can discuss them later on. Lessons gleaned from this flight can be invaluable, so don't lose them. Now let's talk about a few general tips for any kind of night flying. Number 1, improve aircraft familiarity. It's easy to find the carb heat or fuel selector during the day, but can you find it in the dark without a flashlight? Fumbling for switches or controls creates a distraction and reduces situational awareness. Spend some focused time learning the operation of your aircraft during the day, or at least in a lighted hangar, before flying at night. Number 2, know the clouds and the moon. Flying on a clear moonlit night is a vastly different experience from taking off under a solid low overcast. Inadvertent flight into clouds is much more difficult to avoid in the dark, and it is common to encounter situations at night that are technically VFR, but offer little more visual reference than true IMC. Check the weather and the moon forecast carefully and know what you're getting yourself into. Number 3, choose the right lights for your mission. A small flashlight with a red lens is great for the cockpit, but will you need a brighter light for navigating the deserted parking lot at your destination, or a hands-free option like a headlamp or something with a clip for fueling a high-wing aircraft in the dark while you're up balancing on a ladder? I like a small clip-on light for my in-plane tasks, but I always pack a brighter light in my flight bag, and I've been glad to have it many times. Number 4, reconsider the stop and go. Pilots in a hurry to accomplish the 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop for night currency may be tempted to make stop-and-go landings in the name of time efficiency. Before attempting this, remember that it can be harder to judge remaining runway distance at night, and the darkness can impact your perception in other ways that can reduce your safety margins. Calculate your required landing distances carefully and consider a taxi back instead. Number 5, don't go it alone. There are so many good reasons to bring a CFI along with you for a night flight. Has it been a while since you've flown in the dark? Are you less than 100% familiar with the aircraft? Is there any question about the weather? Are you flying into an airport that may have invisible obstacles? If you've answered yes to any of these questions or still have any doubt about the flight, then bring a CFI along. Flying at night adds additional risks and challenges, but it doesn't need to be scary. Developing your skills and competence in this facet of aviation can provide benefits that will apply to nearly everything else that you do in the cockpit. If it's been a while since you've flown at night, just grab a CFI and maybe go beyond those bare minimum requirements for night currency and work on truly building your proficiency by going through some challenging night flights together. Well, that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Advancing Pilot Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode and sign up for my email newsletter at advancingpilot.com. Thanks for listening and fly safe.